Hello there, friends, and welcome to the Doing What Matters podcast. I'm your host, Teresa McCloy, and today we're going to step out of the box a bit. Erica Vinson will be back with us next week as our co host, but today I just want to take some time to celebrate with you and have a conversation about the launch of our 300th episode. You heard that right. This is episode 300. It's crazy for me to think that I've been doing this for almost 6 years. That's an incredible thought, though. Today, I'm going to do a solo episode celebrating and discussing not only 300 episodes, but the idea of what I've gained from the consistency of doing the podcast for 300 episodes. So let's dive in. When I first started this podcast, I had no idea where I'd end up today. I remember back in 2019 sitting and listening as the first episode released, wondering if anyone would even find the episode. And here we are, almost 6 years later. I've got some stats that I'd actually like to reflect on for a bit as I look back. I've had 3 different titles for this podcast. I started out talking about the Enneagram in your real life. Those were the first 100 episodes, and I had so much fun having all kinds of conversations with different guests about their Enneagram type. Then I switched over to the Real Life Process podcast. That was a season where I was putting together all of the framework for the real life process, the modern day rule of life system that is foundational in the work that we do. We also now have over 80 certified coaches that also use the content of the real life process in the work that they do. I'm not sure any of that would have come together without this podcast. And then just recently, we have switched over, and the podcast is now called Doing What Matters. We're all about putting the idea of doing what matters into action in our everyday, ordinary life. When I look back, each of those seasons have been about 100 episodes, or about 18 months or so, as I've evolved and the podcast has evolved as well. So we've changed the format or the title, and that's really holding true again. My good friend and teammate, Erica Vinson, is now joining me as a co-host, and I've really enjoyed the episodes that we've done so far. Over these 300 episodes, we've had over 163,000 downloads. That just blows my mind. We've reached over 15 different countries, according to our statistics, and I'm so blessed to know that so many people have been tuning in from around the world. Now, for sure, podcasting has changed since I started in 2019. We have walked through a global pandemic during that season. We've had ups and downs in the number of downloads and as we've changed titles and all of those things. But I still love podcasting just as much as I did back when I started in 2019. Over the years, I've varied the format, sometimes doing solo episodes and other times featuring guests. I've been blessed to have an incredible variety of guests, from my dear friends like Mike Kim, Claire Lowridge, and Kim Avery, to talking Enneagram typing with Chad Jeffers, a musician who plays with Carrie Underwood and is also a successful realtor in Franklin, Tennessee. There's also people like Roger Whitney, who's a highly successful podcaster himself and host of the Rock Retirement Community, and even family members like my mom and even Farmer Dale, my husband. Plus, so many of our certified coaches from the real life process have joined us as guests and shared their expertise. Of course, there's been many dear friends and mentors like Dan Miller, who I had the privilege of hosting twice before he passed away this past January from cancer. Some of my favorite episodes have been with my friend and team member, Terry Johnson, who passed away 2 years ago this Christmas. I treasure those episodes and those recordings that I have with both Dan and Terry. These conversations were so meaningful, covering everything from grief and loss to joy and success in business. Some of my deepest and most meaningful and treasured conversations are also with my team members, Lindsay Sturkey, Nancy Bowens, and now my co-host, Erica Vinson. I think she has been on the podcast more than any other guest until she started co hosting with me recently. The podcast has helped me grow personally and professionally, sharing from my heart and revealing parts of my story. And as I've refined my message that God has called me to share with the world. Most podcasters record episodes ahead of time, but I've really never done that. This podcast has grown me as I have grown. I might be a week or two ahead at the most, but often you're hearing my life in real time. I love that because I picture you, the listener, as I'm recording. I picture where you are at in life and what's going on in the world, and I consider what season you might be in, both the year you're in your personal journey. One of the biggest lessons that this podcast has taught me is the value of consistency. Consistency is about showing up regularly, even when it's hard. And there's been times where it's been hard to record a podcast, but it's so important in so many areas of our life. And by doing things like recording the podcast each and every week, making a daily gratitude post every day on social media, those two practices have built my relationships, my health, my business, and grown me personally and professionally. I think we can learn through seasons in our life where we practice consistency. When we practice consistency in relationships, we work on our communication. We work on showing up every day in both the hard conversations and the joyful ones. When we practice consistency in our health, it's about small incremental steps over time. That's something I've really been working on in this past year. And it's starting to show up and it's starting to make a difference. Or growing as a professional. One of the things I want to do is show up consistently to support you in your business and know that you matter. You matter to me and you matter to those that you serve, whether you have a brick and mortar business or an online business. The work that you do in the world matters so much. And so I do this podcast to support you. There have been weeks when I didn't feel like recording or I didn't know what to talk about. Some weeks the episodes are actually better than others, as you might have noticed. And if you've been listening for a while, you know that sometimes I'm sharing from business perspective, sometimes I'm sharing from a faith perspective, sometimes I'm sharing from a personal perspective. And Eric and I will continue to do all of those things. But that's the beauty of doing this consistently. It's helped me to improve in all areas of my life. It's like I have a journal or a dialogue with you each and every week that I get to share. The podcast has shaped me as a coach. It's helped me to write a book, and it's taught me to take risks and put myself out there. As we move forward, just like anything that's done consistently, the podcast will continue to grow and change. You've probably noticed some of those changes already with Erica joining me as a co-host. She brings so much richness and depth from her own story, the way that she does business, the way that she thinks, and the way that she processes, which is totally different from me. And I love that. I love the depth of our conversations together because we've been friends for a very long time. And I love sharing them with you, our listener. I can't wait for you to hear even more as we continue. She's just an amazing human being, and I respect her immensely. Our friendship, our faith, and our work as business owners and teammates will definitely come through in our conversation. As I continue to explore what rest really means, we'll be defining it more here on the podcast. It's about connecting deeply with ourselves and with God, and then living that out in our everyday work and life, living from a place of rest, not rush. I'm also thrilled to make an announcement right here and now of something new. Starting in October of 2024, I'll be launching a sister podcast with my friend and team member, Lindsay Sturkey. It will be called the Real Life Practice Podcast. We'll be bringing back discussions from the One Life Maps podcast that has about 90 episodes already recorded. When we acquired that business last year, we looked forward to someday relaunching the podcast, and that day has finally come. but it will be with a fresh focus. The Real Life Practice podcast will have episodes that are done in seasons, exploring more of the being side of life and how we create rhythms of spiritual practices in our life. Discovering more of your life story and how all of those intersect in our everyday, extraordinary life. If you'd like to get a short taste of the Real Life Practice podcast, you can check out our intro episode with the link in the show notes or search for it in your favorite podcast player at the Real Life Practice Podcast. I'm so blessed to have you as a listener. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for showing up each and every week and listening and sharing and doing life with me. I am forever grateful. Thank you, friends. And remember, every ordinary day holds an extraordinary moment. We just have to look for them. And I am looking forward to this next season of the Doing What Matters podcast as we journey together. I'll be back next week with Erica joining me once again for more of the Doing What Matters podcast. Thank you, my friend.